Especially glad to have the Stone County Historical Society here. Glad to have y'all here. I'm Terry Rushing, great grandson of Noam Hinkle Rushing, and just some housekeeping items. There is a fully functional outhouse back here if anybody needs to use it, so just help yourself with that. And I think we've got some water over here if you need that. Is it open? And if you don't like the outhouse, a mile and a half up the road at the Antioch Church at the Outreach Center, there is a restroom that's open up there. John and Lucy Kenner Hinkle, along with their 7 children, moved to this area from Alabama in about 1873. And they built this cabin about that time. And they homesteaded approximately 160 acres in this area. The cabin is roughly 12 by 16. It was built using oak trees from the area here with a broadaxe, hewed with a broadaxe. And the logs are original except for just a couple that had to be replaced a couple of years ago. The fireplace was constructed with the native stone in the area, and there's a spring about 150 yards back here that they would have gotten their water from in the beginning. Later on, they did have a dug well behind the cabin here. In later years, it was filled in. The cabin itself, it doesn't have a loft in it now, but they had a loft in it. I'm sure that's where the kids slept. They, on the back, at some point, they enclosed the back porch, and they had a stove and did their cooking in that area. Let's see. You know, times were real hard back then, and of course, in the late 1800s and after that, and during the Prohibition period, they had trouble scratching out a living and keeping everybody fed. And of course, some of them had moonshine stills. There is one side of the spring about 150 yards back here, and then another side about 3/4 of a mile to the southwest back here that is in a hollow that's named Steel Holler back there. So, yeah. And I'm sure there may have been other sites as well. That's the ones that we know about. During the early 1930s, Clarence and Winnie Hinesley lived in the cabin. Winnie was a granddaughter of the original homesteaders. They lived here with their son Carson, and about that time, there was a tornado come through. The story is that it lifted the top 2 or 3 logs up, and water flooded in and set the logs right back down. And then there was another tornado hit, the one in 2008 that hit Clinton and Mountain View. I think it's still an Arkansas record for being on the ground for 122 miles. It was Category 4 tornado, and it took out a house up here and a house up there, and it took off the roof of the cabin, but the logs were left. The last person that was born in the cabin was Wendell Hinesley. Some of you may know him, and he is a descendant of the homesteaders, and today is his 92nd birthday. He's lives in Illinois, and he was unable to come down here for this. But he's had a great interest in the cabin, and he's the one that maintained it for many years after his parents passed away. There were several different families lived in the cabin over the years, and for a time the ownership of the cabin left the Hinkle family, and then I think Clarence and Winnie Hinesley purchased the property, and ownership stayed in the Hinkle family since then. The last person to live in the cabin was Roy Hinesley, and he lived here in the 70s and maybe the early 80s until he passed away. He wasn't a descendant, but he was related to the family, and he was the last one to live here. A couple of years ago, Wendell couldn't take care of the cabin anymore, and he turned ownership over to my siblings and I, and we've been able to work on it and restore it. And Dave Smith did a lot of work on it, and we'll hear from him later. Jim Rogers did a good job of repairing the chimney. It needed quite a bit of work. Okay, I think that's it, isn't it? Now we'll hear from Lucy Kenner Hinkle.
That's my name. I was named after my grandma, Lucy Winston. I was born in 1842 in Alabama. That was Summerville in Morgan County, and that's about 35 miles from Huntsville. Well, we had the typical pioneer life. And by the time I turned 17, I met a handsome young man named John Hinkle. And we courted. He asked me to marry him, and I said yes. So we got married in Blount County, Alabama in 1859. And by the next year, in 1860, we had our first child. And then the next year, I was expecting another one when a great tragedy occurred that we all know now as the Civil War. That's when, by that time, Alabama seceded from the Union, and our men were expected to, they were able bodied to go and fight. And that's what my John did. Well, that left me at home, a young wife with two young children, and trying to take care of the farm and the garden, keep them fed, and to just keep things going while he was gone. Occasionally, he might come home and plant crops and that. So we rocked along until thankfully that awful war ended, and we were back together as a family. We lived there in the same area for several years until we had our seventh child, and that's when we decided to move west, like a lot of other people did about that time. We had heard about the land that you could get here through the Homestead Act, and so we headed for the Ozarks and made our way here. We packed our wagon, and the mules pulled the wagon, and we had a milk cow and some chickens and just a few possessions that we had, and here we came. Boy, that was a long trip, and I never want to camp out again after all those nights on the road. But we arrived here, and of course, it looked nothing like what you see it today because it was trees, big white oak trees with no underbrush, just all over the place. But there was some good timber to make this log cabin. So we got busy with that. And we had some really good neighbors that helped us. We had a house raising. So my guys, John and our oldest son, worked on cutting the logs, and then we had a house raising where this little log cabin was put together. We had some good neighbors about a mile away. They had moved here from southern Illinois. Ephraim Owen Rushing and his wife Basha. So they moved here about a year before us, and he being from Illinois and of about the same age as us, he served with the Union Army in the Civil War. But we made peace with each other and really just didn't talk about it. And that kind of opened the way for our kids to get to know each other. And a couple of them married one another, and you're going to hear from one of them here shortly. Now, did I tell you that I had a twin brother named Will? Also, we were born in 1842. We stayed close our entire lives, and he moved here too. And he lived away back here, not that far as the crow flies, I guess, down at a Tick Creek where it flows into the Little Red River. And his wife, Martha, was a midwife. And so she delivered our last baby that was born here in the cabin. She also helped deliver several of my grandkids that were born in this area. So we were very grateful to have Martha with us. Well, when I think about it, all the tough times we went through, I know God got us through those tough times, and we just forged ahead. And I hope that my descendants today will remember that you just work through those hard times and you'll get through them. Have descendants all over the country and even a few outside the country now. Now, my kids, my 8 children, when I called their names, it's a bit like poetry. So I'm going to try to recite their names. And then here in a minute, first you'll hear from John, and then you'll hear from each one of them. So it goes like this: William, Liz, Jane and Fan, Sim and Gnome, Ike and Dan. And that's my 8. And I love them dearly. Now, when you hear from them in just a minute, don't get confused about some of them being really young and some of them being kind of old. Because, my kids, they had different lengths of life. Some of them had short lives and some of them had longer lives. So it may seem a little out of order to you, but that's just how it happened. So I want to turn it over to John to tell you more.
Well, I've been asked since she's already talked a little bit about our family. I've been asked to talk a little bit about our history from Alabama and the wartime and things like that. But I was born in Georgia, the oldest child of George Washington Hinkle and Nana Lavina Weaver Hinkle. At our young age, we moved to Alabama, and that's where we pretty much resided. And of course, like you've already heard, we farmed. We didn't own slaves, non-slave owners. Did what we could, and other my brothers. I had 6 brothers and a couple of sisters, but we were pretty well settled there until the war came along, and of course, Alabama seceded early in 1861, and we just really weren't too fired up about just jumping in right then. But by December, we'd heard about this new law passed called the conscript law, where they were going to make all of us go into the army anyhow. So we figured it would be better to serve together, pick who we wanted to fight with, and not be, sent to whatever group they wanted us to go to. So me and 5 of my brothers, David, Peter, George, Solomon, and Silas, we all enlisted in a unit that was became known as the 3rd Confederate Cavalry. It wasn't a state like a lot of places. It was the 3rd Alabama, 1st Georgia, whatever. But we were raised directly by the Confederate government, and 7 of the companies were from Alabama, a couple from Georgia, and 1 from Tennessee. So we were kind of a hodgepodge unit. But me and my brothers, we joined at Arkadelphia, Alabama on Christmas morning, 1861. And for pretty much the next year, we were all over the place. I don't know if y'all really know what cavalry does, but pretty much we're sent out forward to scout, to picket the roads so our forces aren't surprised by the enemy. And we wound up went as far as the Ohio River up in Tennessee, all the way to the Atlantic coast and all of that. So we covered a lot of ground, constantly on the move. And that's what we pretty much did the first year. And as the Union Army started getting further into Tennessee, that's where we kept pretty busy. And our first big battle was December 31st of 1862 at a little town called Murfreesboro, Tennessee, along Stones River. And that was our first taste of the real, what you would call, battle. And it started out real good. We had the Yanks on the run, and being cavalry, we were sent around to get behind them and capture all their wagons and supplies, and we did that. But it's kind of like the shoe got put on the other foot, because the next thing we know, we're getting surrounded, and we have to make a scrambled run to get out. And two of my brothers got captured because their horses got shot, and I got cut off and couldn't get back to the army. So we were kind of missing from the army for a little while. I got back pretty quick, but they had to do a little time up north in a prison camp for 3 or 4 months before they turned them loose. But we all made it back, and from then on, like I said, we went all over the place. We fought a battle up on the Ohio River, right at the Ohio and the river up there where Fort Donelson is, and that was like in February after the Battle of Murfreesboro. And we did lots of scouting. The Union Army pushed on into Tennessee, and we were constantly on the move. Now, my brother Peter got sick with the measles about that time, about September, and he was the first one of the brothers to die. And then that same month, we were pretty hard pressed. We had the big Battle of Chickamauga, which is right there in northern Georgia. And that again, we were on the flanks of the Union Army while the main battle, and we whooped them good that time. And we messed with them all the way back up towards Nashville and all that. But after that was pretty much what we did. In 1864, the Union Army under old General Sherman decided to invade Georgia, and boy, he kept us busy for months. From about May until September, we were constantly somewhere fighting, picketing, scouting, doing something. About that time, our youngest brother, Silas, who was only about 16, he got the measles and died. And both him and Peter, we got their bodies taken home. They're buried down in Blount County, Alabama. But anyhow, from there on, we were, like I said, we served in Wharton's brigade of General Wheeler's cavalry. We went all over Georgia. We went to Savannah, Georgia. We went to the coast. Last battles we fought was a battle of Moore's Creek, and then again at Bentonville, North Carolina, and that was right before they surrendered. And so that was pretty much it. And I tell you, you hear the old fellas in the infantry talk about their feet are hurting and all that. Well, I can tell you, when you ride a horse all the time, you get calluses and blisters in other places that are not any more pleasant than the ones on your feet. I can promise you that. But we went back home, tried to pick up the pieces. In Alabama, Reconstruction was pretty tough. The government just had it out for all of us, made it real tough. So me and my other brother, David, decided to come west. We heard Arkansas was a little bit better place. They weren't under the hard hand of the U.S. government like Alabama was. So we headed west. My daddy had died before 1870. So he got my mother, Nina Lavina, and his family, and I got my family, and we headed this direction. Now, I stopped here, and he kept going further west and settled over in what's now called Pope County, a little town called Appleton. And that's where they lived until my mother died, and then he took his family on over into Oklahoma. And so that's where he settled. Now, the other brothers, they all stayed in Alabama. Their families are still there as far as I know. I've made a couple of trips back to visit. And but for the most part, just lived here, grew crops, grew a little cotton. I had a deer trap. I trapped deer for people and sold them to them. I think I sold 35 at one time up at Harrison to a bunch of folks. But I made a neat little trap underneath a bluff with a real high rail fence, and the deer would jump in there, and then they couldn't get out. But that's another story. like I said, all my kids grew up here. They the youngest wound up getting the farm place here, the homestead, and you'll hear from him and some of the other kids, and I'll let them talk about their memories. Like you heard, me and Eve Rushing, we just didn't talk about the war much, but I had another neighbor a little bit further away over around Fox. He was in the 1st Georgia Cavalry, and we were in some of the same units and fights, and so me and old John Jefferson Hinesley, we had some good talks. But for the most part, we just let it go. And of course, you had a number of people here that had served on both sides, so we all had to kind of learn how to just get along. With that said, I will pass on a little bit. After my first wife died, I remarried and I had another child. And I believe I think I was about 72 when he was born. Well, I was 82 when he was born? Or is that when I died? Anyhow, I was old when I had him, and my oldest daughter, she got mad at me because she knew she'd be the one to have to raise him. And sure enough, she did wind up having to raise him. But his name was George Hinkle, named after my daddy. And the thing that unique about him was he was a soldier himself in World War II. And just a little modern history about him, he was in the armor, the tanks, and he was captured by the Germans at Kasserine Pass in North Africa, wounded in the leg, and he always told the story about the Germans were just going to cut his leg off, and some Polish doctor told him if they would let him take care of him, he could save the leg. So they did, and he saved my leg. So I was able to survive, but I was in a POW camp for 4 years, 2 years, and I think I got down to about 96 pounds, walked all over Germany. The war ended, got out, took me about a year to get back up to snuff, and I still in the Army, and lo and behold, a few years later, I wound up in North Korea, and we got about to get overran, and I decided real quick I wasn't going to be a prisoner again, so I just unzipped my sleeping bag and ran as fast as I could because I'd already been there once and it wasn't happening again. But I survived that, or he survived that. I'm getting kind of, yeah, I'm talking about George. Am I old? Am I old? Okay. Yeah, I'm talking about George, not me. That'd make me real old. But anyhow, I will let the kids come up and tell the rest of the story. Who? William? Okay, well, I'm going to turn it over to him, and you can hear what life was like from their viewpoint.
Well, you kind of got to overlook Daddy. He gets a little confused in his older age here, but he thought he was one of the younger generation, but just kind of overlooked that part of it. But I'm William, and I didn't really want to be up here today, but my mom, Lucy, told me that I was her favorite. So I said, well, I better at least get up here and say a few things. So but anyway, I'm William Hinkle, and I was born in 1860 in Alabama. And it was a tough time, as you kind of heard some of the history. You know, Dad went off to war to fight there, and so it was just Mom to take care of the farm and me there for a time. And then when I was around 13, we moved here, and we did a lot of hunting. And you heard Dad talk about the trapping back here and stuff like that. And we built this cabin. There's a big stump right here under the somewhere under the porch. I've forgotten now exactly where it's at, but kind of a little bit of history of that. All the white oak trees were here, built all this cabin up, helped Dad do that. And I got married when I was 29 years old to Lucy Gibbons from right down the road here on the Little Red River, little place called Settlement she was from. And so anyway, we farmed about 240 acres. We're right around the Shirley School, if some of y'all came through there, right in that area. And so we did that for a while. And then a little bit later, we decided around 1920 we'd moved to Oklahoma to a little town called Byers, and we farmed there, and so we had 7 children, and most of them they're scattered out, but from Oklahoma to Texas to California, and so anyway, in my last years, I went and stayed with my son in Fort Worth until I passed away. But that's kind of my story.
Hello, my name is Liza Ann Whitaker. My family called me Liz. I was born in 1861 in Alabama, the second child to John and Lucy Hinkle. I was 12 years old when we packed our wagon in Winston County, Arkansas, Alabama, and made the big move to Arkansas. It was a very long trip, 360 miles in a wagon. I walked most of the time so that the little ones could ride. The Mississippi River is the biggest river I've ever seen. We had to cross it in a ferry boat. I remember living in a tent out of the wagon while they built the cabin. Being the oldest daughter, I helped Mama a lot with the babies born after me. In 1883, I married Waldo P. Whitaker. I'm pretty sure I coined the phrase, "Where's Waldo?" Anyway, Waldo and I had 2 children, a daughter Cora and a son Gay. I went to my heavenly home soon after Gay was born, and there's a little marker with my name, Eliza Whitaker, at the Rushing Cemetery. I had 2 children, 8 grandchildren, and I lost count after 22 great-grandchildren. My descendants are mainly in Texas, Oklahoma, and California.
Good afternoon. My name is Mary Jane Hinkle. My family called me Jane. I was the 3rd child of John and Lucy Hinkle. I bet it was tough times when I was born, since it was during the Civil War. When I was 11, I moved with my parents to Arkansas. This place was full of oak trees at the time. I helped with the kids and gardening while the men were felling trees and cutting logs for our cabin. I remember sleeping in the loft, all 8 of us kids. In the summer, we took our quilts and slept on the porch. I was 19 when, in 1883, when I married a local boy from Fox, William Lawrence. I gave birth to our son, Robert Franklin Lawrence. I died soon after his birth. You'll find my name on a marker at the Fox Cemetery. Misfortune followed my little family. My son died when he was just 22 years old. He didn't have any kids. I'm happy to be remembered at this place that I'm proud to call home.
Good afternoon. I have notes. I am Frances Lavina Hinkle Carter, known to all who love me and knew me as Fanny or Fan. I was the 4th child of Lucy and John Hinkle. My older siblings were William, Liz, and Jane. I was 7 when we made the trip from Alabama to here. And when I was 16, I met a boy from over in Pope County named Jim Carter, and we married within the year. I was 17 and Jim was 21. And Jim wanted us to kind of find our way west and figure out how we could have the best economic future. By 1900, we'd been married 16 years. I'd given birth to 8 children, and 5 of them were still living. I had lost 3 babies. And in 1900, we had settled just south of the Red River that separated Texas from Indian Territory. And by the next census in 1910, we were over in Wichita Falls. We had our 5 children were Matt and Marv and Maggie and Cora and Ola or Viola. We ended up settling in Cleburne, Texas, which is not too far from Fort Worth as a crow flies. And what took us to Cleburne again was some sort of economic prosperity. And what happened in Cleburne at that time was the Santa Fe Railroad. Cleburne was just a transportation area for wagon trains and for trains as well, but all kinds of transportation. So Santa Fe Railroad built a mechanical hub for all of their trains. And ended up that all of the men in the Carter family were employed by Santa Fe Railroad and actually lived near each other. It was Santa Fe employee housing there in Cleburne. So my husband and my son, so my husband Jim and my sons Matt and Marv and Jimmy all lived there because I did have a younger son later, Jimmy. They all worked for Santa Fe Railroad, and the descendants that I have there that are Carters never left. And so had a grandson named JC, and his family still lives in that area of Cleburne. But I want to tell you a little bit about my son Matt. My son Matt, he married a woman named Ethel Shaw Carter. And for some reason, Ethel's family wasn't too keen on my son Matt. I don't know why, but her daddy didn't really like, really like Matt coming around much. And she had 2 boys, gave birth to 2 boys, JC and then Robert. And Robert was born in 1918. And it just so happens there was an awful pandemic in 1918, 1919, the influenza pandemic. And Ethel found out that her younger brother had contracted this awful virus. And she went out to the family farm to help her mama take care of her brother George. She got sick. And those 2, George and Ethel, died within 17 days. Can you imagine? Losing 2 children like that. But Ethel had taken with her, of course, because she was nursing him, little Robert. Robert was only 6 weeks old, and somehow he lived. And Matt then, my son Matt, well, he came back and he didn't know what to do. He was grieving and trying to make a wise decision about these 2 young boys. JC was almost 4 and Robert was 6 weeks. So he made the decision to ask Jim and I if we would take in little Robert and raise him. I was 53, and Jim was 57 when little Robert came to live with us. And Matt, my son, not too far away, just down the street, he took JC to raise him. And so Jim and I raised little Robert for 18 years. And my daughter Cora, she married for a short time, but not that long, and she moved in with us, to help us raise little Robert. And so Robert was an athlete and did really well. And he was actually recruited by Baylor to play football for them in 1937, 1938. And then the coach there at Baylor, Coach Woodson, he got recruited to a little school called Arkansas State Teachers College to be the head coach there in Conway. And he took the offer, and he brought his best football player with him. And that was my grandson. I was so proud because somehow or another my grandson was making his way back to Arkansas. And there I'd been in Texas all those years. And so Robert came back, and lo and behold, there at ASTC, he met a young college student named Elizabeth Wiggs from Marlton. And the rest is history on them. So Robert and Elizabeth, she was called Lib. They married during the Second World War in Kingman, Arizona, but they came back to Conway to settle. And that's where they raised their 3 children, Phil and Johnny and Susie. And in another way of looking at this person before you, that's Susie. So if you ever went to ASTC or SCA or UCA, if you had a post office box between 1952 and 1986, you might have known Mrs. C. That's what everybody called her. And so, it's all about the love of family. And I know that I was so tickled, when my grandson found his way back to Arkansas. But that's the reason we're all here, because we love each other and love family. And I'm honored to be here with you today.
Hi, my name's Sim Hinkle, son of John and Lucy Hinkle. I was born in 1857. I was 6 years old when we made the move from Alabama to Arkansas. I remember helping gather water from the well just west of here, helping Mom in the garden. And then once I was a teenager, I was helping hunt, putting food on the table. I married Margaret Files in 1892. We homesteaded not far from here. We had no children of our own, so we helped raise my brother Dan's 2 children after their mother died. I moved out to Rosebud, and that was my final resting place when the Lord called me home.
Heidi, I'm Naomi Hinkle Rushing, and I was the baby that came when Mama and Daddy moved here to Stone County. When I was 17, I got acquainted with Philip Lanthy Rushing, and we courted and we ended up getting married. And they just lived off, like Mama said, over at the Fall Off Hollow. I was the one, my daddy, like they said, like Daddy told you, he fought for the Confederacy. Well, my husband's daddy fought for the Union, but like Mama said, we never let that bother us. So when we got married, Lanthy and I built a house just right over there. And I ended up birthing 8 kids. And like Mama and Daddy said, I was the one that raised George that my daddy had at 82 years old. But he was a good kid. So Lanthy worked down in Shirley at the railroad station, and one of the things he bought was a pocket watch, and I still have it and keep it in my pocket, and it works still to this day, keeps good time. We raised cows, we farmed, the boys hunted, and there was a time later on that we sent cream to Cersei to make Yarnell's ice cream. And I have a grandson here, he's almost 88 years old. Anthel, where are you? He won't eat anything but Yarnell's ice cream to this day. Frida's here too. She's another one of my grandkids. Where is she, Frida? There she is. I had a whole passel of grandkids, and not one of them would come visit. They would come by they all came usually. There were 9 of them, but I usually had about 7 of them. And when they came, they were getting into no good all the time. But let me tell you what happened at Grandma's house, stayed at Grandma's house. There was one time where they got into a whole heap of trouble. I didn't tell them, but when they got home, they really got in trouble over some watermelons that they weren't supposed to pick. I did a lot of cooking in my day. We'd invite a lot of folks home after church to eat with us, and I had a tendency to feed the hobos when they came along the road during the Depression. One of my favorite things to do was when the grandkids were there, was to have one of the boys go pick out a Dominecker, and I'd wring its neck and fry it up for them. And we thought that was so good, and they did too. Their favorite was my milkshakes. I'd take some raw milk and put an egg in there and put a little nutmeg. And I usually didn't have very many store-bought ingredients, but if I had a little vanilla, I'd slip it in there and whip that up, and they thought that was something else. You know, we did have a good life, but I tell you, it was kind of sad because I outlived 4 of my kids. Let's see. Lena, she died when she wasn't just a year old. Both Myra and Basha died of cancer. Ephraim had the Spanish flu during the First World War. So that was kind of sad, but overall, you know, we had a nice place to live, always had plenty to eat, and never had lots of money, but that was okay. Lanthy died in 1939, I guess, and I stayed with my kids a lot, or they'd come stay over here on the home place with me. And I lived to be 78. And, you know, I just always took the Apostle Paul's words at heart to live a quiet life, tend to my own business, and work with my hands.
My name is Isaac Hinkle, but everybody called me Ike. I was born in 1872 in northern Alabama, and evidently, according to my mother, I was the reason we moved to Arkansas, because I was the last one born. She said we had to get out of Alabama as soon as I was born. So I don't understand that. But anyhow, this is the place where I grew up and, you know, cut my teeth on everything, learned how to fish and hunt and farm and drive a wagon. I married a girl from Shirley. Her name was Mary Magdalene Crouch, and that was in 1900. So I was 32 years old when I married her, and she was just shy of her 16th birthday. So not saying anything bad about me there. We called her Meg, and in 1905, we decided to move to Oklahoma to a place called Byers, and that's where all of my kids were born. I had 9 of them. All of them went there, went to school there, grew up there. Since then, they've kind of scattered in different directions: California and Illinois, Texas, Oklahoma. All of my grandkids went to school at Byers and graduated from Byers. As a matter of fact, one of my grandsons, Glenn, was the last graduating class of Byers High School in 1946. But in 1928, we had all but our 2 youngest girls, Aline and Nethaline, raised when misfortune struck me. Melvin, one of my sons, had just gotten married to Rachel, and I don't remember why, but they had all gone to town, get supplies or something. I stayed home to work on my tractor. And whenever they came back, they found the tractor laying on top of me. So 3 days after we just celebrated the wedding. But, you know, Meg, she finished raising our little girls during the Great Depression. I pay tribute to her and the good Lord, and the fact that we've got 30 grandkids and a ton of descendants from that help populate Oklahoma and the surrounding area. I don't come back here very often, but it's good to be here today to look at the old home place. It looks completely different than whenever I was a little kid running around in the pastures. So, and if you ever want to come visit me, I'm in the Byers Cemetery in Oklahoma. Thank you.
Hello, y'all. My name is Daniel Webster Hinkle, and I was the last one of the kids of John and Lucy. I was the only one born right here in this cabin. So, we lived here, and I learned, like my other brothers, I learned how to hunt and shoot a gun and help the family raise the gardens and do all the stuff here. So it was a great life learning how to do all that stuff. Uh-oh. Okay. Anyway, and I had 7 other brothers and sisters, so I had lots of bosses. They told me what to do all the time. And being the baby of the family, I did sometimes do what they said, but not all the time. But there was a little town, you've heard a little bit of people talk about, a little town called Settlement that was close by. It was across the river, and the only way to get there was to ford the river. And so around 1900, I was, we had been going across the river, and I met a lady named Sally Hanson, and we courted and was married. And then so about 1911, you heard my mom passed away. And so when she passed away, Daddy just couldn't hardly take it, so he moved off. And that let me and Sally live here in this cabin. And by that time, we had 6 children. And so we had one more on the way, and in 1912, we had little Delcy. And boy, she was sweet. And so we was going along pretty good there. And then all of a sudden, little Delcy and Sally came down with a consumption. And everybody knows now that consumption was TB, or tuberculosis. So that took their lives, and now they're up here in the cemetery. So anyway, and we went on there, and I just couldn't hardly take it. So I didn't think I could raise those kids. So I ended up letting 3 of my family members each take 2 of those kids apiece. And I went on and I worked, and then I think somebody alluded a little bit to it earlier. Got into making a little moonshine down in Still Holler. And so that led me into a little bit of trouble. But that trouble ended up, if you keep on, it sometimes leads you into some good stuff. So I ended up being, of all things, a city marshal of Shirley. Everybody knew me. I was a little bitty feller, but everybody knew me because I carried a great big gun, and I carried a mule's leg bone as a club. And everybody thought that, and pretty much knew I wasn't too scared to use it. So anyway, that was kind of the story about that. And now, me and Sally had all of our descendants, like the rest of the brothers and sisters and family, are spread out all over Arkansas, Oklahoma, Texas, got some as far as Washington State and Alaska. But this has been a wonderful place to grow up, and we really enjoy y'all coming here and enjoying this cabin. 150 years old. Thank you.
Okay, you got to meet every single one of us. So I'd like to introduce you to the cast. And if you'll come up here as I call your name, I'm Renee Rushing Carr, and I live just over there, and I grew up around here, and I portrayed my great-great-grandmother, Lucy Kenner Hinkle. And so John, where's John? Okay, if you'll come stand down here, because we're going to pose for a picture when we're all lined up here. So, I think up. Yeah. So this is Anthony Rushing from Bryant, Arkansas. He's a retired history teacher and Civil War enthusiast. You couldn't tell it, could you? We're glad he's building a weekend home here, and so good job, Anthony. Now, my youngest son was portrayed as my youngest son, William. Come on up here, Nicholas. Nick Rushing portrayed his great-great-grand uncle, William. He's really my nephew. Yeah. And he's the oldest nephew, my oldest nephew, and he's portraying the oldest son of the family. So, I thought he was sweating this, but I think he really enjoyed it. I thought, well, anyone that can preach a sermon every Sunday could do this. And he did both, right? So good job. All right. Who was next in the lineup? I think it would be Liz, right? Okay, come on up. Eliza Hinkle was portrayed by Ellie Carlton. She's an 8th grader, and she's a multi-instrumentalist. I don't know what all she plays. Fiddle. Maybe she'll play something for us shortly. And her dad grew up just down the road here. So she's with us here. And then what about Jane? Okay, here comes Julia Carlton, portrayed Jane. And are you 5th grade? Okay. Julia is a 5th grader, and she also plays several instruments, and she's interested in acting. So I think you always need to remember where you got your start, right here on the Hinkle front porch. So who is next? Fan, my little Fanny. This is Susie Carter Wiggins from Germantown near Memphis. She is one of the ministers at the Germantown Presbyterian Church, and she always wants to honor her great grandma Fanny.
And I did not preach today.
She dedicated the renovated cabin last year when we met, so we were glad to have her do that. Fan. Who comes after Fan?
You can say them all.
Sim. I have to say them all, though, to get them, though, is the problem. All right. Trax Carlton was Sim, and Trax is a 10th grader, and he likes to play basketball. I think he can dance, too. I think I've seen him dance. And the girls, too, right? Right? Okay. Good job. My gnome, come on up. This is Carissa Rushing Gilbert. She's from Bryant, Arkansas, and when she's not keeping things straight, people straight at the church, she kind of spends a few weekends up here too. And so we're glad that she portrayed her very own great-grandmother, Gnome Hinkle. All right, where are we to now? Ike. Hinkle was portrayed by Steve Hinkle from Earlsboro, Oklahoma. Now, he just found out that this cabin existed, less than 2 weeks ago, right? 2 weeks ago, yes. Yeah, when we got in contact with one another. And he was willing to come and portray his great-grandpa, Isaac Hinkle, and did a great job of that, too. And he brought his wife, Melissa, and his sons are out there, too. One from Oklahoma, one from Texas. And they're very involved with their church. He's got a business that's supporting the oil and gas industry, so he travels a lot around the country, too. So thank you, Steve, for saying yes and showing up for us. All right, the baby. Here comes the baby. This is Art Gilbert portrayed Dan Hinkle, and that would be Dan would be his, I think, his great-great-uncle-in-law. Right? Art, if you ever need to go to the heart hospital, he'll be there for you, okay? In Little Rock. And we're glad to have him, that he was willing to take over this role as of last night, bedtime. So he did an awesome job. And Susie mentioned it. When it's all over, we will want all the Hinkle descendants to come up, and we'll get a picture before you go home. So right now, I want to introduce the rest of the program. Terry mentioned that Dave Smith was very instrumental in us getting this cabin renovated, and, you know, he did a lot of work on it. He's got a good background for doing that. I hope he'll share that with you. Dave is also, well, in addition to his music, he is the host of Ozark Highlands Radio. We have some brochures over there. It's a nationally syndicated, or probably international. I don't know how that works. But anyway, I know the broadcast is seen in different places across the world. It's a hour-long weekly program where he helps preserve, to talk about the folk music, and you hear the folk music, and it's a great show, and so we want you to know about that. Brochures on the table, and he will introduce some people that are going to join him in a bit. So, Dave Smith.
Hey everybody, neighbors. That trigger. Yeah, I was really pleased when Renee asked me to come over and take a look at this cabin. I'd eyed it from the highway many times. I love log cabins, built a couple myself. Used to give Mr. Hinesley a ride to Shirley and back every now and again when I would see him on the road. He lived here for a long time. I came over and looked at it, and it didn't seem like it was going to be that big of a job, so I said, sure, I'll do it. But it turned into a really big job, but I'm mighty glad that I did it. It looked totally different when I first looked at it. For one thing, I think the cabin was only chinked one time, and that was probably with mud, because it was all gone. The last, I don't know, maybe in the 80s, somebody came along and kind of remodeled the house. They actually lined the inside of the house with 2x4 studs and sheetrocked it. So it was totally sheetrocked on the inside. It had a loft in it, and it was sheetrocked, but it was such a long span, 16 feet, that it had sunk down, and it was bowed down probably 6 inches in the middle. It was kind of scary to go up in the loft. And on the outside, I think when they did that remodeling in the 80s, to cover the cracks between the logs, they used 1x6s and nailed them on horizontally. And you can see on the logs, you can see a light place on the top and the bottom of each one of these logs. And that's where it was covered by those boards. It worked fine on the porches here where it didn't get rained on, but on the part of the house where the rain would hit the side of the house, it would run down between those boards and get between the boards and the logs. And so we had a real rot problem starting. So first thing I did was ask them to take the boards off. So the family came one day and pulled off a ton of boards, which left the house bristling with nails. The first thing I did when I started here was I started pulling nails. And I actually filled a 5-gallon bucket halfway full with nails. Nothing but nails. You never saw so many in your life, especially roofing nails. My wife will tell you I work barefoot a lot, but I didn't dare work barefoot around here because there's roofing nails everywhere in the ground. Every year, I guess, they would tack tar paper on the sides of this house to keep the wind out. And then by the next year, it needed another layer of tar paper. So a lot of roofing nails got driven into this house. I'd find one that was had 6 layers of tar paper underneath it. So anyway, I pulled all the nails and then cleaned up the cracks between the logs. One thing that surprised me very much is that when they built this, they left the bark on the logs, on the upper and lower part of each log, which was really surprising to me because that's a place for the bugs to get in. But good old white oak, it's pretty impervious to anything. And the logs were in relatively good shape. The one under the window over here and the one around it that goes from it over to the window on the north side, those logs were rotten and had to be replaced. So I had Philip Rushing cut me a couple of oak logs, and I let them dry a little bit, and then we fitted them in. But to get them in, we had to raise the whole wall, which involved Terry's 100-horse tractor and my high-lift jack, and we just barely got it jacked up enough to get the log in and then let it back down. And then a log above the window on the north side, a long log, 16/8, I think it was totally rotten. So luckily there is another cabin near here that still had some logs in it, and I mean just a few, and we managed to get one good log out of it. I still had to splice about 7 feet onto it, and if you take a look at it, you'll see it's the one above the window on this side. You can see where I spliced it together. I put some bolts in it there. Anyway, and then I got to work chinking, mortar and a trowel and a lot of work, but we got her put together. And this is the result, and I'm really happy with the way it turned out. And in the inside, if you haven't been in yet, on the fireplace, there are some pictures of these walls before and after I did the job on them, so it's kind of nice to look at them. So Renee asked me to do a couple songs. When I'm in my spare time, when I'm not chinking cabins, I play a little music. So I was really tickled to find out that my friends Mary and Robert Gillihan, my bandmates, we've been a band for 35 years, they were going to be here today, so I asked them to come up and help me with a couple of songs. I've always been fascinated by empty houses. When I first moved here, I'm from Off, by the way. I came here 52 years ago, and this country was full of abandoned houses everywhere, from all the people that couldn't make it and left out over the years. And so I've always been interested in old houses. I've done a lot of trespassing, checking out those old houses, to tell you the truth. But I just love them. I love going in an old house and thinking about who lived there, and you see an old bed there, and you think who lived and died in that bed, you know, and who worked in this kitchen, and what kids ran around here.
Let me say something.
Sure, go ahead, Gil.
My grandfather Gillihan lived right around the corner here along the straight stretch. He lived there for a while. He married a lady by the name of Myra Carroll that lived there. He used to walk down here. Roy Hinesley lived here at the time, and he would have him to shingle his hair. That's what he would call it.
Shingle.
Yeah, he came right here.
You know, I need mine shingled.
Yeah, well, you do.
Yeah.
You're one or two up there.
So anyway, this is a song that it's a lot about these old abandoned houses. It's called "Who Will Watch the Home Place."
We all need to eat close.
Leaves are turning and falling in showers of gold as the postman climbs up our long hill. And there's sympathy written all over his face as he hands me a couple more bills. Who will watch the home place? Who will tend my heart's dear space? And who will fill my empty place when I am gone from here? There's a green shady nook by a clear running stream. It was my place when I was quite small, and its creatures and sounds could soothe my worst pain, but today they don't ease me at all. Who will watch the home place? Who will tend my heart's dear space? And who will fill my empty place when I am gone from here? In my grandfather's shed, there are hundreds of tools. I know them by feel and by name. And like parts of my body, they've patched this old place. When I move them, they won't be the same. Now I wander around, touching each blessed thing. The chimney, the table, the trees. And my memories swirl round me like birds on a wing. When I leave here, oh, who will I be? Who will watch the home place? Who will tend my heart's dear space? And who will fill my empty place when I am gone from? Who will watch the home place? Who will tend my heart's dear space? And who will fill my empty place when I am gone from here. Thank you.
Nice, well sung.
Another song that I thought I would do for this event, honoring this great old cabin, is a song from a songwriter named Bob Amos from Colorado, written about a true story called Mr. Beeford's Barn. August 1969, after evening chores, we went to see who stood outside knocking on our door. An old man stood there sadly, his hat held in his hand. He said, "I'd like to have a minute of your time. You see, my dad and I, we built that barn in 1899. He said his name was Beeford as we walked across the field, and he told us how they'd raised the frame without a single nail. Just wooden pegs was all it took to make those timbers stand." Then he said, as his eyes looked far away, "Build it right, and it will last forever and a day." Mr. Beeford's barn still stands on our farm, where it stood 100 years before, solid as the rock that it was built upon. It will stand 100 years more. He told us how they'd moved down south in 1921, where farming was much easier and the winters not as long. But he'd made a promise to himself to see the barn again once more before his life was done. Then he shook our hands and drove away into the setting sun. Late that night I gazed out of the window by my bed and out across the meadow while the moon shone overhead. The old barn stood there silver like a sentry in the night. Once more I heard the old man say, "Build it right, and it will last forever and a day." Mr. Beeford's barn still stands on our farm, where it stood 100 years before, solid as the rock that it was built upon. It will stand 100 years more. Solid as the rock that it was built upon, it will stand 100 years more.
Good.
Dave.
Thank you.
You gonna do anything?
Yeah, where's Renee? Renee?
Oh,
Renee.
she's over there visiting with her
Renee?
cousin.
Do you want us to do one more?
Okay.
All right. What could she say?
May I say something?
Sure, go ahead.
All right. if you want to, it always reminds me when Dave sings this song. If you want to see a really nice, well-built house, barn, you should go over to the Smiths place. They did an excellent job over there, and it's a beaut, and I'll bet it'll stand 100 years, if not more.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm sure even if Jed never makes it home from Alaska, someday he'll want to come and see all those nails he bent.
I hope so. Yeah, y'all come over this afternoon. Is that okay, Maria?
No, she said she didn't make enough iced tea.
No, but the studio tours is coming up next weekend, and that'd be a good time to come by.
Yeah.
Let's see, one more, because I'm sure there was a dug well or two or three around here. If you ever look down a dug well, it gives you a lot of appreciation for the people that climbed down in there and did it. What a job. In fact, I don't know about over here, but where I live, you only go down about 2.5 feet and you hit solid rock. So it's hard digging. Dig a little deeper in the well, boys. Dig a little deeper in the well. If you want a big and cool drink of water, you gotta dig a little deeper in the well. Dig a little deeper in the well, boys. Dig a little deeper in the well. If you want a good and cool drink of water, you gotta dig a little deeper in the well. My daddy always told me, don't be worried about the things you see. If you want to get to the bottom of things, son, you gotta dig way down deep. Don't ever settle for second best, a winner's gotta come in first. There's nothing worse than taking a drink that'll leave you with a thirst. So dig a little deeper in the well, boys, dig a little deeper in the well. If you want a good and cool drink of water, you gotta dig a little deeper in the well. Dig a little deeper in the well, boys, dig a little deeper in the well. If you want a good and cool drink of water, you gotta dig a little deeper in the well. Son, find you a good woman, she's the rock that'll make you strong. She'll be the one to lean on when the whole world's done you wrong. There's nothing like good loving, that's the way things are meant to be. Son, find you a woman that'll be good to you like your mama's been good to me. And dig a little deeper in the well, boys, dig a little deeper in the well. If you want a good and cool drink of water, you gotta dig a little deeper in the well. Dig a little deeper in the well, boys, dig a little deeper in the well. If you want a good and cool drink of water, you gotta dig a little deeper in the well. There's a mighty rushing river where the waters run smooth and sweet. Don't be worried by muddy water, be careful where you drink. Life is what you make it, sometimes it's a living hell. But if you want to make it to the promised land, you gotta dig a little deeper in the well. So dig a little deeper in the well, boys, dig a little deeper in the well. If you want a good and cool drink of water, you gotta dig a little deeper in the well. Dig a little deeper in the well, boys, dig a little deeper in the well. If you want a good and cool drink of water, you gotta dig a little deeper in the well. If you want a good and cool drink of water, you gotta dig a little deeper in the well.
All right, thanks. Dave.
Mary and Robert Gillihan, folks.
Dave Smith.
Wait, Mary, wait.
Oh, wait.
We have a fiddle player right here.
All right, good deal.
Ellie's gonna play a fiddle tune. Ellie, you mind if we back you up?
Okay, I want to thank all of you for coming out today. Stone County Historical Society has quarterly meetings, and our next one is December 8th. And it will be about the Missouri and North Arkansas Railroad, the only railroad that passed through Stone County, and just the edge. And Tommy Simmons was interviewed, and we've gotten lots of good source information and gathering other sources. And so I think it'll be a really great program. We also have a handout of our fall series of events. We have genealogy classes going on once a month or so, and we have museum tours and a Mountain View a narrated walking history tour where you can learn about every one of the historical buildings on the square. So there's lots going on this fall, and we invite you to join us for that. We invite you to have a pair. They were grown right here close. And we have cookies and refreshments and bottled water in the ice chest. So please visit and enjoy yourself as long as you want to stay.